Joining us now, Mark Meckler, president of Citizens for Self-Governance. How are you, sir?
I am great. How are you this morning?
I'm doing well. I am so happy to talk with you. I've been telling Chris for months. You got to get somebody on to talk about the Convention of States because this is legit. Love it. What's going on with the Convention of States?
Well, so Convention of States, for those who don't know it, is an effort to call a convention under Article 5 of the United States Constitution. The purpose is to answer a simple question, which is who decides in America? In other words, are we going to decide for ourselves, private sector, private individuals, families, states, or are we going to let Washington, D.C. decide everything for us? I think the founders answered it, obviously, in the Constitution in beautiful calligraphy. It said, we, the people. And so we have the power under Article 5 of the Constitution to call a convention to take the power away from Washington, D.C. That's what we're doing right now.
Whoa. Okay. For a lot of people, you just said things that really lost them. Founders, convention, and Article 5, all going to be things really confusing to many Americans. Many people explain what Article 5 says, because this is... They don't even teach this in school, Mark. Even if they say, yeah, there's this yellow crinkly piece of paper, it's the law. Even if they get that far, they don't talk about Article 5.
Hey, Doc, I'm a lawyer. I went to law school. We didn't learn about it in law school.
Wow.
Kind of how arcane people think this is. But there's this thing in the Constitution. Back in 1787, 2 days before the end of convention, September 15, 1787, a guy named Colonel George Mason stands up. He's from Virginia. And he addresses the Constitutional Convention. And he says this, he says, we've drafted this document. We have a huge problem. We gave the power to Congress to propose amendments if they thought it was a good idea, but we didn't give that same power to the people acting through the states. And then he asked him a question. He said, are we so naive that we believe that a government that becomes a tyranny will propose amendments to restrain its own tyranny? Now, we don't have video. I wish we did because they probably laughed because that's ridiculous.
Oh,
Nobody
yeah.
restrains their own tyranny, right? And we can actually kind of tell they did laugh because Madison's notes say only two words in Latin. It says "nincom," which means no comment. Literally, nobody opposed it. Nobody objected. And in fact, it was proposed that we give the states the power to get together in a convention to propose amendments to restrain federal tyranny. We know how obvious it was to them because they adopted this concept unanimously. Literally, there's no debate. Everybody just slaps their forehead and says, yeah, of course we have to do that. It's the only thing that goes into the Constitution unanimously. So we now have the power to call this convention. It takes 34 states to decide that they want to get together in convention, to get a convention. And right now, 12 states have called for that convention. We're 22 states away from actually seeing it happen.
One of my passions for the Constitution and the structure of America, separation of powers and branches of government, isn't just because of my passion for freedom, although that's what drives it, is the genius behind it, Mark, where they got the balance of power between the people, the states, and the federal government. When the Articles of Confederation ended up being too weak and they said it needs to be stronger, how do we do that without having this tyrannical, centralized government? And the balance with the people and the states are paramount. And unfortunately, over the last whatever number of years, we've seen more power in the federal government and the balance is out of whack.
Yeah, it's really, probably 115, 118 years we've really blown that balance of power. If people want to see how bad we've blown it, there's a really interesting visual representation. So our Constitution, you mentioned the parchment document. You can see the National Archives has the original. You can go look at that. It's really beautiful. A lot of people carry around a pocket Constitution.
Mm-hmm.
But the Constitution we live under today, it's not those. Those are historic documents. The Constitution we live under today, you can order it from the government printing office. It literally says it on the spine. I keep one on my desk. It's 2,738 pages. It weighs about 13 pounds. It contains all of the decisions of the United States Supreme Court about the Constitution, telling us what this beautiful, simple, easy-to-read document means. That's how badly we've broken it.
Wow, I hadn't thought about it that way. That is incredibly discouraging. But the Convention of States going to help that. So the Convention of States, you have, four main proposals or issues that you would like to target with it? Is it four? Did I get that right?
It's three, actually.
Okay, three.
And the way this works is when you go into convention, the states have to say what they want to go in convention for. So what we have proposed at the Convention of States Project, people can, by the way, read this doc at conventionofstates.com. And what it says is there are three things you can talk about. You can talk about anything that would impose fiscal restraints on the federal government. We all agree that the federal government is financially out of control. So that would include things like a balanced budget amendment or making them do accounting according to generally accepted accounting principles. We can talk about anything that would impose term limits, not just on Congress, but on the federal judiciary, including the Supreme Court, and importantly, I think, on bureaucrats. They shouldn't be there for 30 or 40 years. And then I think the most important is you can talk about anything that would impose scope or jurisdiction or power restraints on the federal government. For example, you can tell the federal government, no, you can't be involved in education. No, you can't have an EPA. No, you can't have a Department of Energy or Commerce, all things that I believe are unconstitutional anyway.
I think those are all pretty reasonable, and especially with the first two, this is something that should certainly be appealing to people on the left. Term limits, I mean, they have the same struggles that people on the right have with it. I mean, even if it's from a very biased perspective. And number two, when it comes to a balanced budget amendment, Mark, this is just common sense.
It is, and part of the reason we structured it this way, Doc, is all of those things I just discussed are at least 70% issues with the American public. Term limits and balanced budget, over 80% of Americans support those things. And when you poll the American public about whether they think the federal government has too much power and does too much, that's over 70% consistently across the aisle. So, look, people on the left may think there are things that the federal government does that it shouldn't do, and they may think different things than you and I, but they think the federal government has too much power. So we ought to get into convention, and we ought to talk about that.
Am I right that every amendment to the Constitution has been done via Congress, even when the states would get close to a proposed constitutional amendment, then the Congress just caves and they end up doing it?
Yeah, that's generally true. So, I mean, we have 27 amendments, all of them proposed and by two-thirds of both houses and then out to the states for ratification. So, yeah, Congress tends to cave. In this case, one of the things we're telling the state legislators that are passing this is it doesn't matter whether Congress caves. We're not going to pay attention to them because what they're likely to do is propose an amendment that has so many loopholes in it that Congress isn't held to. Because if you look at all 27, Congress doesn't limit their own power. That's just not what they do in amendments, and that's what we're seeking to do now.
Right. It's just an interesting perspective, too, because likely I think some of them didn't want the people to know they have the power or, no, this is our job, we'll do our job, and go and do it because it's an image thing.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And what we're going to see, the closer we get to convention, we're going to see more and more congressmen and senators jump on board and say, yeah, we really have to do this. I'm completely in support of it. They're not in support of it now, but the closer we get, the more they'll support it.
It's funny. I just love the concept of this, the historical concept or context of this as well. That, exercising something that was set up, 240 whatever years ago, 200. Yeah, not quite 40 years ago. The people now are like, okay, we can go and do this. The historical context is amazing.
I like it because there's a reason that the founders did it. It's interesting where the power resides. So if you think about this, and I've been in 43 states in the last couple of years. I talk to state legislators almost every day. They have no idea that they are the most powerful people in our federal system. The president can't do this. The courts can't do this. Congress can't do this. State legislators have the power to call a convention, propose amendments, and to ratify those amendments, meaning they actually have the power to change our structure of government. And to be clear, what we're trying to do here is not to do some radical alteration to the Constitution. The goal is to take the Constitution back to that document you were describing that set up such a beautiful balance of powers between the states, the federal government, and the people.
Years ago, when the Tea Party movement first started getting going, I went to a bunch of different meetings, and I was asked to come to a meeting it was a breakout group, it wasn't a rally, about how certain legislations could be targeted and how effective the local Tea Party group, could be. And it was in Hanover, Virginia, where Patrick Henry practiced law, and it was at the Hanover Tavern right across from the Hanover courthouse at the time, and Patrick Henry lived above the Hanover Tavern because
cool.
he married the tavern owner's daughter because he's no fool, right? But the Hanover Tavern was kind of a central meeting place where after people did their business, at the courthouse or whatever, the lawyers, everybody else, they'd go over and they'd share a pint and they'd talk about all these issues. So Mark, I'm upstairs and I walk in and they're like, "Oh, we'll be with you in 1 second." And I'm like, "What's going on?" "Oh, this group over here is talking about this issue and that issue." And I start looking around and it's It's doctors and factory workers and teachers, all these different people getting together, doing the similar things for the similar reasons that Patrick Henry and those people got together in the same place. And it was just a wonderful moment.
Look, I think you're nailing a really important sentiment in all of American history. My favorite story in American history is about a guy by the name of Captain Levi Preston. He fights in the original battles at Lexington and Concord, so he's one of the original Minutemen. He's 23 years old when he fights. And in 1843, long after the war, he's interviewed by a historian named Mellon Chamberlain, and Chamberlain asks him why he went out to fight. You know, sometimes I think we forget that context. Like, these were regular people. These were not military people that went to war, just regular folks like you and me. And he asked him why. He asked him if it was the Stamp Act, and Preston says, I never bought one. He asked him if it was a tea tax. He says, I didn't drink tea. He asked him if it was British tyranny. He says, I never felt any tyranny. When he asked him finally, well, why'd you go fight? He says this, which I think you just described. He said, we had always governed ourselves, and we always intended to. And them redcoats, they intended that we shouldn't. And I think that's what you're describing is, look, we are rooted in this idea of self-governance. We actually believe, different than anybody else in the world, that people don't govern us. We govern ourselves. Today, Washington, D.C. believes they govern us, and we think that they shouldn't, and that's what the Convention of States is all about.
I think you're absolutely right, and I think that also includes those people on the left. I mean, I absolutely want you people, and they get that about self-governance as well. I mean, they're rabid about that stuff, and even states' rights when it comes to certain issues. So this is why we fight that common ground. Mark, thanks for the update. Let us know whatever we can do to help get the word out about the Convention of States, okay?
Absolutely. People go to conventionofstates.com, get signed up, get involved, because it's up to them to save the country.
We'll tweet out a link to it, and then seriously, let's get regular updates, okay?
All right. Thanks, Doc.
Thanks, buddy. Conventionofstates.com. Fantastic. Convention of States. Love it.